Hello everyone, and welcome to part 2 of building an Auth app in Deno, Fresh and Supabase. In part 1, we created the UI for our app. This includes the homepage, navbar, our login and signup forms, as well as a page that's supposed to be protected. In this part, we will integrate with Supabase so that we can actually go through the process of signing up users, logging in, and protecting routes. We'll need to add a dependency to our project to make use of Supabase. We can go to import_map.json, and at the end we'll add the Supabase.js dependency. I'll be using version 2.21.0 for this project. To store our Supabase API key, we'll create a .m file in our root project folder. This will contain two variables, the Supabase URL and the Supabase key. Replace these values with your own. For these variables to be available in our project, we simply have to head over to the dev TypeScript file and import the .env load module in our project. This will automatically put our variables in scope inside of our project. With the setup done, we can create our first middleware. In Fresh, middlewares must be defined in a _middleware.ts file. If we look at the docs for middlewares, we can see a basic implementation of one. We'll create something similar. Our state interface will be different. We'll have a token string that will represent if the user is logged in or not, and we'll also have a Supabase client to make it simpler when we make use of it in our routes. Middlewares are scoped based on their location in the routes folder structure. We will have two of them, one in the base route and a second one inside of the auth. So this means that our first middleware will cover all the routes in our application, while the one in the auth folder will only cover the routes inside of auth. With that said, let's create our first middleware. So inside of routes, we'll create a new file called _middleware.typescript. Similar to what we saw in the docs, we first need to import the middleware handler context. Next, we'll also need to import some things from Supabase, mainly the class representing the Supabase client, as well as the method used to create a new client. Lastly, we'll need to import the getCookies method since we'll have the auth token stored in our browser cookies. We'll use that to check if user is authenticated or not. We'll then create a state interface. Ours will contain a token, which will either be a string or null, and we'll also have a field to store our Supabase client. We then need to export a function called handler, which takes in the intercepted request as well as the middleware context. First thing we'll do is to create a Supabase client. We can use the built-in deno.env.get method to retrieve the env variables that we've loaded into scope earlier. This will return a string or undefined, so we make sure that if the value is undefined, we return a empty string. We assign the value of this client to our state Supabase client so that we can easily have access to it later on in our routes. Then we'll try to get the token from our cookies. For our app, the token will be called SupaLogin. You can call it whatever you want as long as you're consistent when retrieving and storing it. If there's nothing there, so if we have no cookies, we'll simply stop here. Otherwise, we can use the client to get the user information based on that token. The get user returns the data or an error. In our case, we're mostly interested with the error response. If there is an error, we'll log the error message to the console and we'll make sure to set the state token to null. Otherwise, we'll set the token to the credentials that we retrieved from the cookie. And lastly, we simply call the context.next method. That's all we'll need for our base middleware. Next, we can update our index route to make use of the state so that we can display a different UI based off of if we're logged in or not. So let's head over to our index route. We'll first import the handlers and page props from Fresh. We'll also need to import the state interface that we created in our middleware. We'll create a handler in our route which will pass on the context state to our page. This will allow us to have access to the token and Supabase client inside of the props field in our page component. With that props field, we can now use it to update the isLoggedIn field and pass it the token value instead. And with the token, we can also update the HTML that we're displaying based off of if the user is logged in or not. In the case that the user is not logged in, we'll simply display the same HTML. And if the user is logged in, we'll make sure to redirect to the auth/secret route, as well as changing the HTML to something different, like nice, you're logged in. We also need to change the button text to secret. Now we can remove this. If we hit save and take a look at our page, we should still see the exact same HTML, but we should now see in our navbar the login and sign up links since we currently have no tokens. The next step is to update the logic for our sign up handler. If we go to our sign up route, currently the handler is only redirecting to the home page whenever the user hits submit. We'll make use of Supabase to sign up the user and redirect them only if they succeed. And on failure, we'll redirect them to the sign up page by passing in the error parameter with the error message so that we can display it to the user. First thing we'll do is to update our post method. It'll now become an async method. We can also remove the underscores for the request as well as the context, since we'll make use of it. We're also going to have to import the state interface from our middleware and change the return value for our handler to make sure that the context is of type state. Next, we'll retrieve the form data from our request, and with that we can get the email and password values from the form and converting them to strings. Using the context, we have access to the Supabase client, and we can make use of the signup method and pass in the email and password fields. Similar to get user, we're only interested in the error response in case there's any. We'll create a variable called redirect and set that to the home page. In the case that there's an error, we'll update the redirect to sign up and pass in the error parameter, the error.message field. Lastly, we can update the header's location response to the redirect field. Testing. Now we can save and head over to our browser. We should now be able to sign up users to our application. If we go to our sign up page, we can try and add a new account, example@example.com. And if we hit enter, we should be redirected to our homepage. Now, next thing we'll do is update the login logic to allow users to log in into our page. So first we'll head over to our login route. Our login route is currently doing exactly the same thing that our signup was doing previously. So we'll remove these underscores since we're going to be making use of the request and context. We'll change our method to be async since we'll be calling the Supabase client, which returns promises. And the rest of the changes will be pretty much exactly the same as the signup page. We'll import the state interface as well as the set cookie. We'll make sure to update our handler's return. We'll get the form data from the request as well as the email and password. Instead of calling the signup method, we'll call instead the sign in with password. For this case, we are interested with the data and error. In the case that the data has a session, we'll make use of set cookies and we'll set a cookie called superlogin with the value of the session's access token as well as the expiration date. Then we'll create a variable to redirect the user to our homepage. In the case that there's an error, the redirection will go to the login page with the error parameter populated with the error message. And finally, we'll simply update the location to make use of our redirect variable and hit save. We should now be able to log in with the credential of the user that we just created. So example@example.com, and if I type in the password, hit enter, we should now see that the UI on our homepage changed to nice, you're logged in, as well as the button. It now redirects us to our secret page. The navbar also changed, displaying the secret and logout link. We now want to also allow the user to log out. So let's quickly create the logic for that. Inside of our route, let's create a new file called logout.tsx. Our logout file is pretty straightforward. We'll first import the handler from Fresh, as well as the delete cookie method, which will allow us to delete our superlogin cookie. We export a constant called handler, which will only handle the get method. Our method will delete the cookie called superlogin and will redirect the user to the homepage. Finally, we just return the response with status 303 and the header. Now if we hit save and test that out, hit refresh, we should now be able to log out. When we type log out, when we hit log out, we should now see the navbar changed. The login and sign up links are now available, as well as the UI text. One thing we didn't try earlier was if we try and recreate the same user. So let's say if I try and reuse the same email, it should show us an error. If I hit sign up, we should see the error message showing user already registered. Same thing for the login. If I try and log in with wrong credentials, it should show us invalid login credentials. The final step is to create a new middleware for the Auth section. This middleware will make sure that users are logged in when trying to access any routes inside of this folder. If we now try and head over to the Auth secret without being logged in, there's nothing stopping us. We'll head over to our code. Inside of the Auth folder, we'll create a new file called _middleware.ts. Hit enter. First thing, we'll import the middleware context handler as well as our state interface. Similar to our first middleware, we will export a function called handler, which will take in the intercepted request as well as the context middleware. We'll create a new header with the location set to log in. In the case that the token is null, meaning that we don't have anything inside of our state, we'll return a new response passing in the header. This will redirect the user to the login page. To be safe, we'll also call the Supabase get user with the token. Based off of the error response, if there is an error, we will also redirect the user to the login page, meaning that the token provided is no longer valid or was never valid. Otherwise, we simply call in the context.next method, and now we can try and access the secret page while we're logged in and not logged in. So if we go to our browser, hit refresh, if we now try and go to our auth/secret page, we should be redirected to our login page. If we type in our credentials, click login. Now if we go to our secret page, there should be no issues. So this completes our app that shows how to handle authentication using Deno, Fresh, and Supabase. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye.